Origin story is over. We've now left Prometheus chained to the precipice, symbolizing the state of humanity, chained to stone, estranged from everyone else and the gods. Eagle, by the way, starts eating out his liver because he refused to tell the prophecy. So, now, generations later, Hercules is born. Lots of cool stuff to say about Hercules. Not going to say it all. But he is a half-son of Zeus, brother of Dionysus. You know him for the 12 Labors. One of the 12 Labors was the quest for the golden apples. It was the 11th labor. And on the way to find the golden apples, he goes to, depending on the story, a few different characters that direct him to Prometheus. Say, if you need to find the golden apples, go to Prometheus. He's the one who can tell you. He goes to Prometheus. Now, earlier in the story, I got to set up something. One of the early trials, one of the early labors, was the Lernaean Hydra. And to defeat the Hydra, you remember it's the one with many heads, and every head comes off, comes back. He uses the firebrand, the gift of Prometheus, to defeat the Hydra. Then he uses the Hydra blood to free Prometheus. He takes his arrows, he dips it in the Hydra blood, but before we get to his freedom of Prometheus, there are two steps to freeing Prometheus. Both require the Hydra blood. The first is that accidentally he is visiting a centaur named Pholos, and they have a jar given to them by Dionysus. Dionysus' best wine. And centaurs are known for being pretty debaucherous, and they love their wine. Pholos is like, dude, he's like, if you open that, it's going to be a problem. All the centaurs are going to come wanting it. Heracles is like, don't tell me what to do. And he opens it, and all the centaurs come. And he has to fight to defend himself. He's shooting the arrows, and he chases them all the way, and the centaurs flee all the way to their mentor's hut. Their mentor's name is Chiron. And on the way, by the way, Chiron is also the mentor of Achilles. So they get to Chiron's hut, and accidentally Hercules shoots him in the knee. This wound, he's an immortal centaur, the immortal centaur, so he can't die. But he has this awful wound, and it's just bad, and he's in this awful state. So finally, now let's get back to Prometheus. When Heracles gets to the precipice to free Prometheus, nobody can kill the eagle. The eagle is impenetrable. The only thing that can kill the eagle is the blood on the arrows. So the Hydra blood arrows kill the eagle. Then he has to talk to Zeus. Hercules talks to his father and asks, can we set him free? And appeals. He makes an appeal. And Zeus says, only two things. One, there must be a replacement. And this is where Chiron comes in. Chiron comes in and dies in place of Prometheus. The part animal dies in place of Prometheus, who can return to union with the gods. So this gets into the whole old tradition of giving up the animal nature to become divine. Then, he also sells Prometheus, and this is something I wish I could say to every scientist in the world, every technologist there is. He says, I'll only set you knowledge, technology, fire, I will only let you free if you wear one of the chinks in the chain as a ring to remember restraint. Because you're going to be free, but you must remember the purpose of restraint if you're going to be free Prometheus. And he does. And so Prometheus is free. And then Hercules gets to ask, now how do I get to golden apples? And he sends him to Atlas, his brother. He takes the golden cup boat, and he rides the cup boat across the western ocean to the western island. And there he meets Atlas. And Atlas, because you can only get a golden apple if a titan gets it for you. But let me tell you what golden apple is. First of all, the word for apple in Greek was melon. I don't know how to pronounce it, but M-E-L-O-N. It means both apple and fruit. Apple wasn't into Mediterranean until well after this time period, right? Of this story starting. So we're talking about the golden fruit. Fruit is fruition. Remember, it's at the sunset, where the sun is ripe, where the day is ripe, symbolic of the ripeness of life. So, the golden apple, the golden fruit, it's like it's your holy grail. It's that thing you must achieve. It's that thing you want to reach fruition. So, Atlas gets the golden apples for him. And in this case, that thing he wants, that's very much bound up in the story, is immortality. So later, when Hercules does die, the Hydra blood comes back in again. The Hydra blood is in the inside of a cloak that his wife Dianara gives him, that she believes is going to be a love charm, but it's not. Actually, the cloak sticks to him, and he can't get it off, and he starts burning alive inside this cloak. The Stoics say that the bloody cloak is symbolic of the flesh, and that the reason why Heracles could die is because he had given up his heroic and pure divine self, marrying Deianira, who was symbolic, somewhat like Pandora, falls into the flesh, and that's why he died. Either way, when he knows he's going to die, he has himself burned alive on a pyre. Just like Christ's body is gone from the tomb, Hercules' bones are missing from the pyre. And there, and this is the end of the story, he marries Hebe, the cupbearer of the gods, and he drinks the elixir. His grail quest is over, and he becomes immortal, and he becomes one of the gods. And this is the story of the beginning of the paradigm shift from the origin story of knowledge, the chaining of Prometheus, the limitation of humans to this awful way of life, to then the liberation of Prometheus, the progenitor, and the transcendence of the exemplary human.
I need a genealogy chart.
Yeah.
What are speculations on what the elixir is?
Well, the nectar. So Dionysus is the god of wine, but before Dionysus was the god of wine, he was the god of mead. And honey was definitely in the Mediterranean, and honey alcohol was in the Mediterranean before wine. And that may very well have been what is related. And there are some other weird, so if they're all, or if this is an offshoot of the Indo-European tradition, which went east, because the Greek language is Indo-European, as is the Vedic language. In the Vedic tradition, soma is what they drank. And that was hard to be sure, but some people have argued a mushroom tea. Others have argued that it was something like ephedra that grew from a plant that they still call something like soma, which, by the way, is also where you get the word for Homer, Heoma. So Homer, in the Greek translation, is a blind man, but in the local Persian translation that was right on the border was elixir. So of the fruits of the nectar. So the nectar, I'm not sure exactly what it would have been. It probably played different roles. At one point in history, they would have called it wine, and another point in history, they might have called it a mead. But what you can say is that the word, N-E-K, is the prefix, and that is a prefix related to the underworld. We have a professor that's interested in what he calls the Nikia, the underworld journey. So nectar is basically the escape from the, it's like, I forget the exact translation, but it's either the putting off or the reversing of that underworld death. So it very much, nectar, even in its word, is like an immortality drink.
So Hercules was burned, and then he drank. How did he drink the elixir if his body was burned?
His soul transcended, and his phantasm. So his soul in heaven, and then his phantasm goes into the underworld, whatever that is.
What's a phantasm?
I don't know. So we're doing good. That's about how long I thought this story would take. But anybody have any other questions? We still have a couple minutes if we're not in a hurry yet.
Do you have a historical period on that of the myth, like sort of when it started and how long?
Yeah, so Hesiod was writing in like 650, around then. Not far off from when Homer was writing. But one thing that's interesting about a myth is normally a myth is inspired by many stories. And I've come to see many stories that I'm almost certain are part of the Prometheus story. One of them for example, it was the who are the purple people? Why am I blanking?
What purple people?
Gosh.
The Smurfs?
No. Well, I'll think of it in a second. I'll think of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians taught Greek's language.
Oh.
The Phoenicians taught Greek's language. And they had this character named Prometheus. And Prometheus was involved with a certain constellation, Gemini. And he was also, the Phoenician gods, they say, all represented human achievements. So the Phoenician religion was very believed to have been somewhat secular and somewhat human-oriented, just like Prometheus' attitude. Prometheus' attitude is, if you've noticed, forget you tyrant religion god, forget you head of the state, I'm gonna, that's one thing I do wonder about.
So maybe from more ancestral religions
Well,
comes Prometheus?
So I think that, okay, yeah, I think there are several versions of this. So I can't get into all the histories that I think caused it, but I think this is one of these stories that influenced this, is the story of the sea people, is one of the ones, and the story of the Phoenicians influencing the Greeks, and also, yeah, there are many, many, many stories that I believe are being combined and distilled into this Prometheus story.
So you think the story is in fact an evolution?
Yeah, I think the story,
As
I would
opposed to
say,
complete whole.
I treat all the primary sources, the oldest sources, with a certain appreciation. However, I consider Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, that was written in the Romantic period, just as primary and just as in touch with the essence of who Prometheus is and what he is as any of the others. I would consider it a crucial part of the evolution. And we should remember, by the way, that the story of Prometheus Unbound, written by Aeschylus, was the end of a trilogy. We only have this one. So, Prometheus Bound, the first of the trilogy. We only have this one.
So, the origin story where he gets bound to the rock, was that story definitely told in a pretty finished, polished up version with him being bound to the rock before the telling of the Hercules coming and released it?
That's hard to know. Actually, in Hesiod, there are sentences apart from each other.
The completion
Both
of the
things,
story.
yeah. It's both. But Hesiod's telling, like, he's just telling a whole, theogony. He's just laying out the whole history of everything. So, but another thing to note is that in that same area, is the Georgian people have a god named Amirani. Amirani is buried in a cave in the top of Mount Elbrus, covered in chains. And he was also the one who stole fire from the gods and gave. So that one's probably a continuation. And then there are many other incarnations of the Prometheus story all throughout.
Well,
Yeah.
I real quick want to ask, when Heracles comes to unbind Prometheus, according to the Greeks who are hearing the story, has that already happened, or is that going to happen?
That's perhaps an unanswerable question. That's a really good question. That brings in the conversation of mythic time. It might even be argued that this happens every lunar cycle. Maybe this is symbolic of the round. And so while we might have a specific Prometheus, specific Hercules, this is still envisioned as a continuous round, a continuous cycle, I believe, just as much as it might sometimes be seen as a linear narrative. I think they're both true.
Cycle of generations or something?
Yeah, 14. He's 14 generations. That's the phases of the moon. I think 13, 14, whatever it is. I read that it's very related to the moon. Obviously, the original mother is Io, who wears the horns and is the cow and is symbolic of the moon. Which planet has Io as a moon? We'll go with that.
Jupiter?
Was it 14 also with the woman's cycle? It's 28 days.
That's
14
exactly
is
it.
the middle.
That's right. And actually, just to say this, and this is a good thing to move forward with, one of the coolest, oldest symbols I've ever seen is of a woman holding her belly, holding a horn. The horn has 13, 14 marks on it to symbolize the phases of the moon, which is the horn, as she's also holding her belly, which symbolizes, so this image demonstrates, like, it was so big that Newton, feeling the apple on his head, he saw, oh, this is the gravity up there, gravity down here, bridging heaven and earth, this great bridge between heaven and earth. But that ancient symbol is symbolizing that same recognition of the bridge of heaven and earth.